was pleased to advise at the Library of Information at the Graduate School of Information Sciences on Ball State University about the subject representation of male homosexuality issues. In fact, the dissertation was composed by two parts. The first part that we are presenting now refers on how it happens in Brazilian indexing language. And the second part is a reflection on how questions like euphemism and the politically correct affect this representation. As I told you yesterday, the question of IO ethics have been researched mainly during the two last decades, but specifically on the male homosexuality issues, there are such a few words, a few papers, and one of these is Patrick Cahill. So the reasons for this study were based on the fact that homosexuality is undoubtedly a growing scientific domain. And what are the reasons that we have for affirming that? Day by day we've been noting more research on this, and as a consequence, the growing of a more specific terminology. And in the specific case of Brazil, the phenomenon of political correctness and the social inclusion have received special attention by the Brazilian government, and more specifically by the Brazilian courts. Nowadays, the Brazilian courts do not use the term homosexual union anymore. They prefer using the term homoaffective union, which in some way dialogues with what Patrick says on the eroticization of the indexing languages. Another example of this tendency in Brazilian law is the use of the term families law instead of family law in civil law, because it presupposes that there are different forms, different shapes of families, and not only one single kind of family. So the research question for this part was, does the Brazilian indexing languages represent accurately the specific topics related to male homosexuality? In order to pursue this objective, we decided to analyze the three main Brazilian indexing languages in order to identify the maximum terminological specificity related to male homosexuality. And those three languages, the first one is the subject headings of the Brazilian National Library, which is based on the Library of Congress subject headings. The second one is the Brazilian Federal Senate subject headings, where we have not only book materials, but also court cases and rules. And the third biggest indexing language is the University of São Paulo subject headings, which has a huge system of libraries and developed 10 years ago its own subject headings list. But what would be our corpus? When would we get the terms to test in those languages? Then we decided to risk. We decided not to respect, we deliberately decided not to respect the literary warrant in which those indexing languages were based. And we decided to go directly to scientific journals. And what was the reason for that? The reason was that we believe that the journal literature is much more specific than the monographic one. So I would say that this literature sets in l'avant-garde of the terminological set of this situation. So we elected three of the most important scientific periodic, scientific journals in questions on homosexuality, and I repeat, although these 3 indexing languages analyzed were based on books, more general subjects, the choice for specific journals' keywords was intentional. I know it's a risk, but it was very intentional. In order to identify the possible maximum specificity of scientific terminology in the domain, periodical scientific literature is considerably more specific than the monographical one, and furnishes a kind of a thermometer of the terminological dynamic of a scientific domain. So, we got an amount of 1,705 keywords, and we selected in this group 93 keywords which specifically referred to the male homosexuality domain. And then we tried to identify what were the possible correspondent headings of those keywords in the analyzed indexing languages. Unfortunately, the results were not good at all, as you can see. The Brazilian Senate subject headings, we got a 22% of matching. In São Paulo State University, 40%. And the National Library, 63%. The lack of terminological control is perceived since the source was natural language, in terms such as gay and homosexual, as well as in the use of the qualifier people of the same sex. Some terms have their meanings modified by group. I would say modified by the group in a chronological approach. If we analyze the first articles and then the last ones, we note a movement, a change in this terminology. I present you some terms in order to show how bad were the results. But those specific terms, most of them with a deep metaphorical shape and very, very used by the scientific community, couldn't be represented in any way in those languages. That was really, really, really preoccupant for us. So, the results demonstrate that there is a terminological imprecision in Brazilian indexing languages, sometimes demanding an approximation of meaning. That was really tough for us because those approximations, in some situations, we needed to go so far to make those approximations that the representation lost its original meaning completely, which can lead to prejudice or even to biased representation, including improper and sometimes inaccurate, I would say many times inaccurate representation. And the presence of figures of speech underlying the discursive community reflected the keywords assigned to the articles are not supported by the indexing language analyzed. Well, as a conclusion, this experience, we are now staying in contact with those 3 institutions in order to present those results and in order to verify what possibilities of a more specific approach they can have. I do know that we were based on journal articles, but as I told you, we think that those articles, those keywords can furnish us a safe thermometer of how this terminology can move all over the time. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, Nick. All right, so we'll do this like we did the others. I'll call on people and So do we have any questions or comments? Please.
I just have a really quick question for Zay. I don't think I heard where you said the keywords came from that you guys were using.
Yes, the keywords came from articles, of scientific articles of those 3 journals. So we extracted the whole amount of keywords, and then we selected the ones who specifically refer to the male homosexuality branch.
Okay, from the content of the articles themselves. Okay, thank you very much.
Other questions? Please.
Yeah, to follow up with that, I wonder what difference humanistic journal would have made to the study. Now, I understand why you did scientific journals, and I think that's great. I don't have a problem with that at all. But I think you might have come up with even radically different terms if you looked at GLQ, which may have been so idiosyncratic, it could have even just sort of created a mass of the study. But is there any research in the future that's going to look at journals like GLQ?
Yeah, that's really a good suggestion. In fact, we needed to decide a corpus, so we made a very quick research among some academics, some research at the university in order to verify what they consider the best journals. But that's a good idea because I think that the results can change completely.
Yeah, and it's going to be really hard to map, the prescribed indexes from these schools, right, onto GLQ, and we'll probably come up with even fewer hits. In part because GLQ is a critical theory journal, so of course they're going to be coming up with terms. They're going to be making terms up, so it's going to be really idiosyncratic.
Yeah, but we were very happy and very surprised when we noticed that some very metaphorical terms that we thought they were only day-by-day terms, they were considered scientific terms. So it shows a richness of the terminological branch, as well as a dynamic movement. Sorry.
Can you clarify? Do you mean scientific to being sciences, social sciences, and humanities, or
no,
just
no,
the
academic.
science? You mean academic?
Academic. Sorry.
So the disciplines of those 3 journals are what? Do you know? Off the top of your head?
Journal of Homosexuality is scientific and social scientific.
Okay.
I think all 3 of them seem scientific or social scientific.
Right. So
scientific, we're thinking
here you have the difference.
Right.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you mean academic journals?
Okay. Academic.
Yeah. So that's the thing. But all 3 of them, you would label.
They're all. If they're scientific, it's more like psychiatry, maybe science.
So sexualities is a.
I mean, yeah,
that was one of the journals.
Science.
So it's social science.
Yeah.
So we don't want to have the narrow view of science per se, because we do have social science there as well. But you're noting another omission in the process of making.
Yeah.
Okay.
But even like psychiatry, what is it? So that's yeah. So they were all social science to greater less.
Yeah, sorry. So I say academic, not scientific.
You just don't want to lose anything in translation.
Yes. Thank you.
Sure. Please.
I found your research interesting. You spoke to compassion. I was wondering if you could just clarify for me a little bit how you think folks on needs sort of compassionate knowledge organization for interdisciplinary work.
Well, I guess it's just this idea that with the folksonomy, anybody can contribute to it, so it's much less a top-down. So that right there is that it's democratic, it's participatory, rather than someone else doing the naming. So that from that standpoint.
So how are you defining compassion?
Well, that's what I'm curious about, and I thought that this idea of an animal folksonomy was really interesting because I'm not sure. So and then that's why I'm kind of thinking, maybe thinking a taxonomy of suffering or of harm or of, is there a way to get into somehow witnessing suffering or doing something that takes the point of view of others into account? And I'm not sure. So and I'm kind of hoping to explore that, and that's kind of one reason I wanted to bring this here, because I'm hoping that maybe we can get conversations going. Cause I've just kind of started. I just finished my dissertation in May.
She's still breathing.
This is kind of like next.
So I think we have 2 responses.
Mine is kind of directly to that, if you don't mind me budging. We did have to speed over it, but in some ways the Viridian ethics is, I don't know if it would be exactly compassionate, you might be able to, but it means that everyone is welcome. So there's compassion in that. But at the same time, even if everyone is welcome, it means everyone is also seen as a threat or an interloper in some ways. So that kind of, I guess, mitigates the compassion part of it. But I think that's one place you can look to how folksonomies can be inclusive, but like almost like uber inclusive to their own demise. So anyway.
And a comment in that same vein, I remember reading something about Folks actually when she was drawing on feminist ethics, talking about the difference between hierarchy, and she, I can't remember the author, you'll probably know, relied on the idea of a web instead of a hierarchy. So I wonder, especially for animal studies, if there would be different metaphors that one could use, like even since you like tear away the cat's cradle, or like, you know, different ideas, but something that was specifically animalistic that might allow for more compassionate ways of indexing and so forth. That would be really cool to see. Yeah.
And I'm sorry they didn't get to Buddhist ethics because
Right.
passion is
Yeah.
Just kidding.
Talk later.
I have a question related to the language, English usage in the title of Melody's and Austin's presentation. And English is not my first language, you probably can tell. So I'm still very confused by the articles, especially. So I have a question about the article "the" in your title.
Oh boy.
Does that mean inclusive, comprehensive?
What was our title again?
Since you mentioned clearly at the beginning that you excluded the miscellaneous category, right? So does that make sense? And when you say you analyze the standard,
I guess you could look at it in that we were picking out what ethical standards are used, and it's plural, so there are the ethical standards, and when we presented all those different, I guess, frameworks, what comes from those. So it's not necessarily maybe we should have said, taken out the I can't believe I'm arguing over the use of the. That wasn't what the question I expected. But I do see the validity of it. I think the pieces that we pulled out of them represent what we witnessed in the practices of the field, I guess. But it doesn't necessarily mean it's the only ones. Does that make sense?
I actually knew what you meant.
Yeah.
But I'm just questioning whether the use of "the" in the title should be reconsidered.
Sure. Yeah. No, I do get your point, and I think, yeah.
Especially when you talk about some of these ethical issues related to this particular question I think it's more important to be picky about it.
Yeah. Certainly.
Something struck me interesting. This is probably for Melissa. Question. I noticed that in Jose's presentation that there seems to be animal references in the vocabulary of male homosexuality that might be very offensive to the animal rights people. Is there a conflict going on here that might be a fight between those vocabularies? Has that ever been noticed or addressed?
No, but I think that, okay, yes, it has been addressed. And there's definitely been, there's so many different jokes that make, very recently I read this article that was saying that there's this huge rise in comparing women to animals, to livestock animals, and from my perspective, I thought, well, this is offensive on both sides of the aisle, for the animals and for women. Like, it's just, why are we making these comparisons, and what are all the assumptions in there? So, yeah, we do talk about that stuff, but not enough. I think it's just starting to really be kind of recognized that
It seems to me that there's a possibility of a real conflict in future with the attempt to try to be have an ethical vocabulary for all communities.
Yep.
And I wonder if that's really possible.
No. Right, and that's, I mean, that's, yeah. That's where the whole idea of having a universal classification, I think, goes. Because you can't possibly bring in all these points of view. How can you name things?
Thank you.
That, yeah, that actually get at this, like, partial knowledges or, you know, this point of view.
And conflicts between the oppressed
Yeah.
is not something that's new to us,
Right, right.
So we think of Audre Lorde's response to Mary Daly in A Bridge Called My Back, where Daly, a white woman, erases black woman's experience in the process of writing gynecology, and there's this open letter that causes them to enter a conflict over what it is to be feminist, and what agenda and what vocabulary and what knowledge can actually be said to be feminist, right? So I think we're gonna have to negotiate that kind of space continually, and then I think it's I'm pontificating. Sorry, it's not my job.
No.
So it implies a sense of motion, right? A constant sense of activity to me. That there's a vigilance to that, right? Because I think that is something that we will see again today.
Yes, I remember now another study on Romance language, which shows, which talks about the metaphorical use of the name of animals as an adjective. And usually the male form means power or strong, and the female forms is offensive. I cannot remember the name of the author, but it's a list in French, in Italian, in Portuguese, and in Spain, showing this kind of use of those
Yeah.
animal names.
Right, and so, yeah, so, but then what does that mean for the animals, right? So that's the thing that I think animal studies is starting to question, because we know that that's a problem, but from the point of view of animals, it's
Oh, so this is partly a question for Melanie and Austin, but sort of also just a broader comment about autonomies. And it's something that I know that everyone is aware of, but it hasn't really come up in any of the discussions, is, of course, the obvious problem that the applying of tagging, there has to be some kind of communal understanding of what the purpose is, and that is frequently abused, and the tagging is used to censor and to all kinds of abuse. And I noticed that when you guys were quickly going through that, there seemed to be a slide that was sort of addressing that question, and so I wondered if you could just briefly comment on that, and just, sort of the larger question of, that the issues that are raised because of that kind of abuse where, things can be tagged. Well, I think Tim Spalding had a blog post a long time ago where he talked about people tagging things asshat and Amazon and all the kinds of ways that people try to whatever. But that communities, if they don't want to let that phenomenon just run rampant, then they have to set up some kind of policing of it, and there's obviously millions of issues with that. But
Melanie, do you want to talk?
Yeah. The slide that you're referring to, I just grabbed to kind of demonstrate Derridian ethics in action. I just grabbed some some tags from Library Thing of the Da Vinci Code, and what I kind of wanted to demonstrate with it is what that ultimate hospitality meant, but then what it meant to be considered the other. And so, like the samples that I pulled was like one that said crap, and the next one said great. They're completely in contrast. And then one was in Greek, so you could see how that could be seen as an other. And then there were sort of the amateurish ones that people, well, what's the point of this? This doesn't mean anything to me. So everything can be kind of seen as as an intruder or an interloper to the, even though it's kind of the risk of this open hospitality. So, even it seemed, there were literally thousands and thousands of tags for the Da Vinci Code, and then you started to wonder, and so many conflicting ones, you sort of wonder what the worth of it is in some ways. So I don't know if you have more to add about Derrida or whatever.
Unfortunately, I don't think I can speak to the practical application. I'm a typical philosopher. But I think going back to maybe a Buddhist ethic here, maybe just a general religious principle of self-transcendence, the idea that it's a paradox that in somehow losing yourself or leaving yourself behind, or the Buddhists might say, annihilating the self, you somehow find the self. So the project of sovereignty of the self, for Derrida, break it down, minimize its sovereignty, and somehow the self takes shape. So it's a very theoretical, abstract principle. I don't know how it applies for tagging them.
The question might be something, is tagging the self, or are you trying to do something to other, right? I mean, there might be something as simple as that to start out with. I mean, I've been scraping the Ann Coulter tags on Amazon since 2007, and it's just absolutely fascinating to see where they started and where they go, and how they get annihilated by Amazon and they go back. And so, but I mean, thank you for contributing that. That's interesting. All right. Other, please.
I don't have a question, but I just want to ask if I could make a little announcement before the break. So.
Okay, sure. I'll remember. Other responses, comments, questions, or concerns? Please.
The only other thing I was thinking, in light of how you were mentioning in the notes, I know that in cataloging records, that's kind of a controlled way to enter notes. But it's interesting to think about the ethics of adding comments onto news articles or these kind of things in terms of violence and harm, as you mentioned. There can be bullying with the tagging. I think about anytime I read a newspaper comments, I mean, I'm frightened by kind of the commentary that's going on, and yet that could be a way to incorporate, you know, a more ethical approach. But then how do you kind of negotiate those two? So I thought that's kind of interesting. Maybe your presentation made me think about that.
I think something about comments and any sort of user-generated content at all is are those users representative of the world of people? I mean, you know, they have to first of all have access. They have to know how to how to tag, and that has to be a value to them. And you know, when people get on their soapboxes and they want to tag, so you know, I think that it can be a misrepresentation of the I don't know, the people. But
my thoughts are kind of disjointed here, but I'm just throwing them out. I think it's David Weinberger, and he's describing Too Big to something. I think it's a newer book, Too Big to Know. That's the more recent one. But he talks about echo chambers and the value of being within an echo chamber where you're working with people who are similar to you, and as you become specialized in that, you ramp up. One would ramp up their knowledge and specialty within that narrow chamber, and then the idea of punching a hole through those walls and letting the light of an opposite echo chamber kind of come in, and he talks about I think there's a site, I haven't looked at it yet, but it's called Reddit. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with that, but as a means of perhaps trying to move toward this ability to find common terms and understandings between these echo chambers. So
All right. I think we're ready for Tina's announcement.
Oh, this is just a little Sanford Berman related project. So, and it doesn't really have anything to do with I/O, but he, a campaign that he is involved in is trying to get the U.S. Post Office to issue stamps for Mother Jones and Eugene Debs, who are important labor leaders in U.S. history. And I have a kind of moderate interest in philately, so it's something that I've talked with him about. And so part of the campaign is just getting people to write letters to the post office requesting that they do this, and they only accept these suggestions in the form of mail. You can't email them. So I have these pre-printed postcards that just have a little, a brief statement of the request and a little place for you to, sign your name. And so I was just wondering if you're interested in helping out with this. I have this stack, and you can just fill it out, and I'll put the stamp on and send it, or you could take it and do that too. But it's sort of a pet project of his, and I just wanted to help out. And the other thing is that if you talk to him, don't mention it because he doesn't know yet that I'm doing this.
Thank you very much. And in the spirit of compassion, I'm sorry that I cursed Robert Moses' name. I realized I got a bad feeling after I said that. I agree that he's an interesting man, and there should be a bike ride out there, I'm not really into cursing, so I realized that I was like, oh no, I shouldn't have done that. So I apologize for that.
Now you made me feel so.
No. Not the intent. And with that, I think we'll close the morning program and invite you to lunch, which is again out and to the right. And please join me in thanking our three speakers.